right, welcome to the first recorded episode of Can I Say Something Season 1, or Season 2, stumbled right out the gate here. Welcome to the first recorded episode of Season 2 of Can I Say Something. I am Andrew Ward, as rusty as all hell as here we are. I'm excited to have Ryan over here. I could introduce him, but instead I'm going to take a page from the classic Nardwuar host of music legend lore. I'm stumbling over my own words, so I'm just going to turn it over. Ryan, who are you?
Yeah, my name is Ryan. I'm an Irish cannabis activist and drug policy activist as well. I'm currently a student in university in Ireland, so I'm involved in the Students for Sensible Drugs Policy chapter in my university, and I also work with an organisation called Crainn that pushes for sensible cannabis policy in Ireland. So looking forward to talking more about all things Ireland and cannabis.
Appreciate you introducing yourself, and admittedly one of the reasons why I asked you to introduce it is I knew I was going to mispronounce Crainn, so thank you so much for doing that. I have Irish heritage in me, but it's been several years removed and my pronunciation is off, so apologies if I get anything wrong, and feel free to correct me along the way.
No worries. Your second name, Ward, is an Irish name. I recognise that.
Yeah, you know, I get that decent amount. Yeah, when I was in Barcelona, some people said that. So I got to do a little bit more research. But we're talking about my history, my family. We'll do that on an Instagram post. I'm excited more to talk to you about weed legalization and the progress being made by you folks and others in Ireland. So you talked about working with Crainn, but actually I'd love to just kind of touch on SSDP to start off right away, because they're a really prominent organization in America. Really brought up some of the best cannabis journalists and activists and other folks in our industry that we're seeing, and great to see it going on over in Ireland as well. How did that all come about? When did the chapter start, and how did you get involved?
Yeah, well, I started in university last year, and there was a chapter already up and running for a couple of years. But when I came into university, it was just after the COVID pandemic, and everything had kind of shut down. So I'm currently in the process of building that back up in my specific region. But there's a couple active around the country now. It's starting to rebuild after COVID, and there's a bit of momentum behind it. So there's been a number of events held by SSDP in Ireland at universities, having politicians, activists, medical professionals just speaking to university students and professors, and getting the word out there that we need a change. So it's in a process of rebuilding back up. But we will get there, especially over the next few months.
Good to hear. And anything we can do to help spread the word, let us know. And when did cannabis come into your life? Was it college that piqued your interest, or was it beforehand? And how did I guess kind of give me your timeline. How did SSDP and Crainn come into your life?
It's interesting, actually. So ever since I was younger, I don't know, I just kind of had an interest in mind-altering substances, even just from a kind of theoretical point of view, or just an interested point of view, almost like a hobby. I loved reading up about it. I came from an area that was actually quite affected by stuff like addiction and things like that, so I'm also interested in that aspect of it as well, how drugs can be a positive, and how certain social factors can also turn them into a negative, whether it be just addiction or even criminalization, which affects different communities more so than others. Then also stuff like cannabis. What really interested me in it when I was younger, I was always a little bit, I don't know, outspoken maybe, but even before I'd ever went near cannabis, I was like, this is ridiculous that this is illegal and alcohol is illegal. So I always kind of had it in my mind. So kind of as time went on, and as I got into university and I started meeting more people who are also interested in this stuff, I just kind of found my way into the activism space. We'd get talking to like-minded people, plans would get made, different groups already existing out there. We'd meet with them, everyone's coming together, especially at stuff like 420 marches that happen every year, kind of networking. So that's kind of where I am now. I've been involved in this only about a year and a half, 2 years, so it's still quite a new thing. And Crainn was kind of when I first started, when we set the organization up. That was kind of my first foot in the water. So,
oh, nice. Yeah, and kind of talk to me about the founding of Crainn and what your work is doing, to specifically what your contribution is to it.
yeah, so the Crainn thing is quite broad. I'm sure you're aware of the Reddit community called or slash trees.
Yes,
So
yeah, yeah. I
yeah.
actually,
So
I also, I think I follow the Cron page as well nowadays.
yeah. So kind of every country it seems has their own version of it. So Crainn was set up way before I was even a teenager. The subreddit was set up, and moderators who previously owned it, they're getting careers, they're getting jobs, they're moving on. So it kind of passes the parcel. So kind of got laid on to myself and a few friends as laps that this is this subreddit that's just kind of sitting here. So we kind of took that up. Kind of revived it, got it going again, and we then branched out onto different social media platforms, set up a committee then of kind of an activist base, which I'm a part of, and over the past 2 years, it's grown more than just the Reddit community. We're now an organization. We're involved with
Yeah.
activism, lobbying, and stuff like that. So that's kind of how it got started. It's just a community. That's where you meet a lot of people online. You know.
Yeah, and I think that's a testimony to, there's different cultures and cannabis cultures across the world, but it really does seem like, cannabis, when you show up is how you start to make a difference, and that's how you start to build the real network of, the people that, matter to you in the cannabis space.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. And you were talking a little bit, about the drug culture and the positive and the negative side of it in Ireland. I think that's really an interesting aspect that people would want to like hear about. Especially in America and Canada. We see exclusively to the methamphetamines and the sort of things that are really not seen much in other countries. But obviously every country seems to have its struggles, ups and downs with it. Can you kind of walk me through where Ireland is and how cannabis fits into the equation?
Yeah, so kind of in Ireland, we don't really struggle with stuff like fentanyl or meth like those in North America do. It's usually heroin or benzodiazepines. Um, so the real problem is probably the same in America as well. Affects certain communities more than others, due to different social factors and kind of more systemic problems that exist kind of all over the world, and the problem is made worse. And kind of how cannabis fits into that, I guess. Everybody in Ireland, not everybody, but all communities and all types of people smoke cannabis here. Um, but the law sees all different drugs as the same. They're all under the same blanket and under the same sort of prohibitions, which is how we're dealing with it in Ireland, which is different from the American way and the Canadian way, which we'll talk about maybe a little bit more about how we're dealing with drug reform. It's kind of a different approach that we're taking. We're taking kind of a whole drugs approach at the same time, which has its pros and cons, I suppose. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely want to touch on that too. And I do think one other aspect is because I feel like we're I see it a little bit from the English side, a little bit with the kind of a revision, or if some people are at least looking at with drink culture as well. With alcohol, how does that fit into the equation too? Is like where does that stack up? And obviously it's a lot more prominent in cannabis, I suppose, but like how did that kind of fit into both in the culture and today?
Well, alcohol is a massive part of Irish culture. It's a massive part of a lot of people's cultures, but it's not really seen as a drug, but it is very devastating impacts on society as a whole in terms of public health. There's lots of people who are sick from alcohol, and there's a certain kind of um, there's a certain level of harm around it, on the basis of how powerful alcohol is as a substance on the body. But
Right.
it's not seen as a drug per se. It's kind of separated into its own category as something that's not really a drug and everything else is. But there's different conversations happening on alcohol in Ireland as well in terms of advertising and stuff like that. But it's not something I'd be too involved in. But you definitely see it as a young person. It's totally normal to drink alcohol at the age of 15, 16, 14. It's totally normal. So
Yeah, and I think that's what always kind of baffles cannabis advocates, because we see these other things, and I'm not of saying most people want to see restrictions placed on these things or restrict it more, but it's like maybe we could reasonably, rationally lessen the restrictions on cannabis. It only seems like a fair comparison.
yeah, definitely. It's the hypocrisy I noticed when I was younger. Just I don't know how came across it maybe on TV or something. But it was like a picture. It was about 14, 13, a picture of like the statistics of alcohol harm and cannabis harm beside each other. And that kind of set me off a bit. I was like, this is crazy,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, I feel like it's the helpful memes that you sometimes see in the world, and
Yeah.
the old website information that used to get more readily shared about, like, yeah, those things like really opened people's eyes to it, and really kind of
Yeah.
showed that the propaganda really isn't real. So what kind of propaganda were you facing as a young person growing up there? Was it the drugs are bad, the marijuana leads to death and all that sort of stuff, or was it different for you guys?
I guess it depends on a few factors. For me personally, cannabis was always, just in my background, in my family, it was always seen as something less harmful than other drugs, and it's somewhat more acceptable. But that's not the same for everybody in Ireland, anyways. Like I know, even in college, like sometimes if someone finds out that maybe someone smokes cannabis or that you've tried cannabis or that you support legalization, depending on the person, you get a whole lot of kind of like, whoa, this is crazy. People think you're just crazy, like,
Yeah.
so. But
So still a lot of
yeah,
lot of stigma carrying for you guys.
a lot of stigma. Yeah, a couple of years ago in 2013, now I would have been too young to be cognizant of this happening at the time, but I watched back a debate in our parliament from 2013 of a debate on cannabis, and stuff was crazy. It was like the politicians were saying the people who were advocating for this are out of their minds. Like nobody would advocate for this unless they were high. We had a gateway theory. We had a kind of all sorts of crazy stuff. That was only in 2013, while America was legalizing, but it was complete consensus in Ireland's parliament at the time, pretty much complete consensus that cannabis was basically the devil and that we're never going to legalize it ever.
Wow, wow, and it's crazy to see just the progress that can be made. It's a big uphill battle, but it can be made, and it does happen. It just takes a lot of folks like yourself and the people from the previous guard just pushing it along.
Yeah.
I was doing some research on it, and like, correct me if I'm wrong. Was it really just the 60s and 70s that really started the incremental movement for cannabis reform in Ireland, or was it some more significant moments that kind of brought it along to these points?
Well, so kind of, I don't know if in the 60s and in the 70s we had that much of a movement. We had, that's when the prohibitions came in Ireland,
Oh,
which
okay.
were kind of following the lead of America. I know the war on drugs kind of started around that time, and Ireland was following your guys' lead. It's very interesting to read the old transcripts of the parliamentary debates on that time. So we were kind of following America's lead then. There were some concerns raised about, well, maybe this is too far, these prohibitions are too far. But for me, when I look at the history, there's been a bit ups and downs across the way. But in the early 2000s, there was an Irish politician called Luke Ming Flanagan. I'm not sure if you've heard of him.
No,
Um, yeah, he was an Irish politician in the early 2000s. He's still a politician now, but he started a campaign. His political campaign, his election campaign was based around cannabis legalization, and he was quite cutting edge with his campaign stunts. He rolled up joints and posted them in the mail to all the sitting politicians and got into the press. His
oh,
election posters had the cannabis leaf on them, so it was kind of a first of its kind. And he got elected, under this
wow.
under this project. And he was in the parliament for a number of years. He's in the European Parliament now, and he's still fighting for cannabis reform. We've done some work with him, but he kind of started the push. I think he initiated a lot of debates in society a couple of years ago and got the ball rolling. Even though he was shot down, a lot of the material he was using back then, we're still using now. A lot of the arguments, a lot of the points.
He created the
So
playbook.
created a playbook, yeah, yeah, of different form of activism to us. He was a lot more loud about it, but you had to be if there was nobody else doing it. It's a bit more,
Right.
thanks to him, it's a bit more kind of acceptable now, and the debate is out there, and we can just push it as fact at this stage.
So you're seeing that stigma erode a little bit, and you're, actually being able to be more of I guess, a commonly accepted political movement or something of that nature.
Yes, yeah, the stigma is starting to corrode a little bit. There is a little, just in society, maybe not politically, maybe a little bit politically, but society in general, we very high approval ratings for legalization of cannabis, very high approval ratings for decriminalization. So in terms of the number of people advocating now, it's more than ever than before. It was a smaller community before, but it is growing now. It's much more normal, you
That's
know.
That's great to hear, man. That's awesome. That's that's what you need. You need the numbers. Once you have the public, then you can do it. And as America has indicated, it still could be an uphill battle from there. But at least when you got the
Yes.
public's voice behind you, and not assuming that you're a monster because you advocate for cannabis legalization,
Yes.
it's always a good start. I want to dive into the reform for sure. That's obviously I know your bread and butter, but I also want to like for listeners to make sure we get inside views about different countries' cultures when we talk about in these sort of episodes. So kind of talk to me about, what the cannabis culture of Ireland has been like over the years. What is, how is the cultivation over there? Where is the sourcing from? Back when it was, the underground market, not trying to get anyone in trouble or anything, but like, what was the process like to go about it, And then, we'll talk into now where the current laws, but, kind of what has been the culture that led us up to where we're at
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, well, we're still under the same laws. We're still under the prohibition. So everything is still underground at the moment, unfortunately. In terms of like a culture of growing and in community, it's a small enough community. It's because the the punishments for growing cannabis are extreme. I have some friends, a couple of activists who have been done for growing cannabis. The punishment and the consequences of that are extreme to no end. So it's still quite a private culture in terms of a very overtly cannabis. But personally, I'm from Dublin, so Ireland's capital city. There's a couple of bars that are maybe centered around rock music and stuff like that that are weed friendly, kind of low key weed friendly, which is where a lot of people go to smoke up and to enjoy music and enjoy, instead of hiding away behind like, a park or behind a bush. There's a couple of places in Dublin, I'm not going to say to incriminate anybody, but there's a few
Sure,
places
sure.
that you can go to in Dublin to kind of to have a smoke and to have a chat and to listen to music. So it's
S-
very underground, still very
Still very
undocumented as
quiet.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to hear that. I was recently in Spain, and I had two experiences over there. In Madrid, it was very very quiet, very underground. In Barcelona, it was a little more out and open, but still very quiet. Like,
Oh yeah.
so what for you guys is it? No signage, no nothing like that. Just kind of has to be
Yeah.
very the old speakeasy sort of approach, essentially.
Yes, it's kind of like that. Yeah, there's no yeah, there's a couple of like head shops where you can buy like bongs and stuff like that, but you wouldn't be buying it's very close now. It's very closed down. Even compared to Spain, like Spain compared to here is like, wow, this is paradise. Like there's social clubs, which is like I haven't actually been to the States myself, but I've been to Spain and I've been to Amsterdam. But Ireland, yeah, it's still very underground. It's usually a private thing amongst friends. There's no kind of broader place, except maybe during 420, where there's a lot of community and stuff like that happening on 420, which is always one of the best parts of the year if you're interested in the culture and the community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've actually kind of take us through that. What is kind of like the 420 celebrations like? How does that kind of compare to the rest of the year?
Yeah, so the 420, so there's a couple of different activists and activist groups who we all work together kind of around 420. So there's a big community on Instagram for the 420 marches and stuff like that. But really what happens is the activists, we get together, we usually do in Crainn, we'd help out and we'd publish some literature, some informational booklets, stickers, stuff like that, and we'll hand it out to everybody at the event, which has instructions on how to kind of get involved in more political engagement. So we'll do that, but it's usually just people. There's a march down Dublin City, and then there's kind of like a sit down in the park, a picnic in the park, where people can just smoke up. There's never been any trouble from the police or anything like that, and there's hundreds of people there just enjoying it. It's usually quite good. There's people who are giving speeches, activists, and it's usually a nice day because it kind of shows what it could be like if it was legalized, um,
Right.
because there's never any hassle and it's always just very chill. And there's people who are, which I find great, people clean up. There's a team of activists who wear like a kind of a jacket and they clean up the park from rubbish from people smoking and stuff like that. And the
That's
park is left
huge.
clean, so it's a good look for everybody as well.
It really is, yeah. And I mean, I hate to say that we have to do it, but what? I mean, giving clean up your community is always good, but like really having to walk that fine line and sometimes go the extra mile to show that we're it's like, see, we're not causing fights, we're not beating anyone up, we're just smoking and maybe eating a little more and hanging out with our friends and laughing. It's
Exactly.
It's so, once you're through the looking glass, I feel like, and you see that cannabis is this positive thing, or it's so much different than what I think most of us have been fed our whole lives. It really is, so apparent that it is that. But like, you always got to remind yourself that the folks that don't understand it, that don't know about it, it really does kind of shock them when they see that it's not this hostile, evil place that sometimes they're being led to. So,
Hmm.
yeah, it's, especially for the work of advocates, what has it been like, with trying to get the public sentiment over in Ireland? Like you said, a lot of people are now on board with it, but what was the big opposition to it? Was it, I know it's a very religious culture over there. Was it religious based, or was it, other factors that were playing into, the stigma and, I guess the still
Yeah,
ongoing stigma?
yeah. So kind of from our perspective now, the public support, I think it has been strong. We've engaged with the public kind of on the streets in conversation on a couple of our informational campaigns, and that's always been positive. The pushback really comes. It's a there's three parts that I see of pushback that's not from the public. It's usually a political pushback. Um, the police force push back very strongly, and some in the medical profession. That's what's really holding the line in Ireland. It's political uh, kind of pressure, the police force completely against it, and then there's certain sectors of the medical profession who are kind of holding a similar line that's really stopping any reform and really fighting back against it. So that's kind of where the main pressure comes from that we've had.
A lot of major forces then you're up
Major
against.
forces, yes, yes, yeah, yeah.
Jesus. So now, I really want to touch into the big part, like we're saying, the reform aspects of it. Despite facing all those major oppositions, there has been progress to some degree, right? 2019 was the passage of medical.
Who are kind of holding a similar line that's really stopping any reform and really fighting back against it. So that's kind of where the main pressure comes from that we've had.
A lot of major forces then you're up
Major
against.
forces, yes, yes, yeah, yeah.
Jesus. So now, I really want to touch into the big part, like we're saying, the reform aspects of it. Despite facing all those major oppositions, there has been progress to some degree, right? 2019 was the passage of medical.
Who are kind of holding a similar line that's really stopping any reform and really fighting back against it. So that's kind of where the main pressure comes from that we've had.
A lot of major forces then you're up
Major
against.
forces, yes, yes, yeah, yeah.
Jesus. So now, I really want to touch into the big part, like we're saying, the reform aspects of it. Despite facing, is that correct?
Yeah, around then, yeah, we've had medical, which it's good, but I think there's only about 30 patients. So that's 30 patients.
And that's, yeah, I wanted to kind of get what we hear that say the passage of medical. Now you say that, like, what is the reality? Like, what is it? What are the hurdles that you have to clear to get into the
Mhm.
program? What is the accessibility like? With everything else being still prohibited, what's the current situation?
This will probably be bizarre to people listening from America, but there's currently three conditions on which you can be prescribed medical cannabis. One of them is cancer-induced nausea. Another is treatment-resistant epilepsy, and then there's another one in there as well. Quite rare conditions. So those are the three conditions, and even if you have them, you're not guaranteed to get medical cannabis. So basically, nobody has medical cannabis in Ireland. Basically, nobody. There's no such thing as a medical cannabis program here. Even like the one in the UK, for example, which is still pretty difficult, but it's nothing like it basically doesn't exist. It might as well not exist. Nobody. There's about 40 people who have the license. So it basically doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's kind of just in name that it's there. And so, with that minimal amount of individuals even qualifying for it, where is the country getting the medical cannabis from? What is like the process like? What is the quality? And it's just going through a pharmacy, I assume, correct?
Yeah, as far as I know, they get their medical cannabis from the Netherlands. Um, so that's where it's imported from. And I think some of the products, or most of the products, aren't even flower based. I think they've a lot of Sativex and stuff like that. So there's a couple bit of flower based stuff there. There's a couple of medical cannabis companies here as well who are absolutely, dying to get some flower out there and to get people off the illicit market. But we've seen no real shift in the medical cannabis policy yet, but maybe in the next little while, it's under review at the moment, which is promising. There's a review process taking place, which we're waiting to see the results of that.
Any
But
idea when that might be coming out?
I think next month. There's a review. The review is due to finish next month. Um, so that should be interesting. There's no real rumors about it at the moment, so it could go either way, But have to see how that goes.
Fingers crossed. Yeah. Well, hopefully
Yeah.
that's good because that would be kind of following in the heels of 2022, which had to marked a pretty big year for you guys. On two fronts, if I remember correctly, with the Citizens Assembly and your the report on drugs. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, the report on drugs. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they kind of happen both at similar times. I can get into the first of all maybe the report, because that preceded the citizens' assemblies. This took place, I think, last summer. So the government held a meeting on drugs, an examination, a analysis of Irish drug policy, and they invited a number of different activists and organizations. And we got invited along with some other people, and we were asked to present evidence, which was a very exciting opportunity, for us to be
Yeah,
in that position. So we made a number of recommendations to government on what to do about drug policy. So the committee, made up of government politicians. It was a cross-party group, so there was government politicians, opposition politicians, independents, all working together on this, which was big.
that's
So
great.
they came out and they said, well, we found that we actually need to decriminalize drugs. We need to legalize home grow of cannabis. We need to start working on a legalized system. So they said all of this stuff, and I remember reading it the day that it came out. We were at a kind of a press conference thing for it, sitting in the audience. We were handed out. We hadn't seen it. We didn't. I personally thought it was going to be terrible because this is how these things usually go.
Yeah,
We were like,
absolutely.
oh, this is crazy. So that was the report. That was a big day for a lot of people, because the government have published a report that's saying that they want or they need to legalize cannabis and they need to decriminalize. So this kind of led into something called the Citizens Assembly, and I'll explain to the audience kind of what the Citizens Assembly is if they're not aware of it.
Yeah, please do.
Um, so in Ireland, a couple of years ago, the government in Ireland created this process called the Citizens Assembly that's designed to deal with usually go.
Yeah,
We were like,
absolutely.
oh, this is crazy. So that was the report. That was a big day for a lot of people, because the government have published a report that's saying that they want or they need to legalize cannabis and they need to decriminalize. So this kind of led into something called the Citizens Assembly, and I'll explain to the audience kind of what the Citizens Assembly is if they're not aware of it.
Yeah, please do.
Um, so in Ireland, a couple of years ago, the government in Ireland created this process called the Citizens Assembly that's designed to deal with usually go.
Yeah,
We were like,
absolutely.
oh, this is crazy. So that was the report. That was a big day for a lot of people, because the government have published a report that's saying that they're controversial or kind of polarizing issues in society. So previously, during the gay marriage, same-sex marriage debate in Ireland, they established a Citizens Assembly because it takes a different approach, which is it's made up of 99 randomly selected citizens. So not politicians, not people with their own interests, just 99 random people from the census, and it
Wow.
puts them into a room over the course of a number of months to meet once a month and to hear presentations from experts and also to have an open discussion amongst themselves. So they've done this process on gay marriage, abortion, climate change, other constitutional issues, and they established one on drugs because this issue in Ireland has been quite politicised over the years, and it's currently underway now. So when the process is finished, the 99 members of the assembly, those random citizens, write up a list of policy recommendations to the government, and every single one that's happened has turned into law. So we're quite hopeful about how this is going. It's currently underway. We've had 4 sessions so far, and it's been quite interesting actually so far. So
That's amazing. Yeah, that's actually a really cool approach. And that's why I kind of started this because I want to see the different approaches and perspectives, especially from like legislation of how this is getting done. And I feel like if you got 99 random Americans right now against, there's few things that we would all agree upon, but cannabis legalization would be almost the full tilt agreement at this point.
yeah, 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 it's been interesting to watch it because it's all live streamed and you can see everything that's happening. And when it's kind of humanized, like when a political issue is taken off, let's say the internet, or taken off, the television, and it's put into a room and people are forced to discuss with each other what's happening, it's much easier to reach consensus. We've been seeing strong consensus come so far on certain issues. So
Wow. And are there any sticking points that you're seeing that are mimicking the political debate?
it's kind of it feels a lot separate from the political debate, in a way that it's more in touch with reality, and
Mm,
because we're seeing in the last session, which was just this weekend, um, some really strong words against criminalization, against the criminal justice model, saying it's completely failed. The government has failed. It's like this, the government were completely shown what's going wrong here. So there's been strong calls for decriminalization so far, and this is of all drugs, which is kind of different
yeah.
to other countries' approaches, because cannabis so far has been discussed on its own, but the whole issue is kind of like it's a total issue of drug policy and it's failed in all these different ways. So decriminalization is the current consensus that I see, but regulation and legalization is also being talked about. And you can see that the citizens, when they contribute, and you can hear them talking, they're absolutely dying to talk about regulation and what that's going to look like and whether or not they're going to do it. They really want to discuss it and understand what it's all about.
And what about the position of Crainn? What do you eventually want to see? Do you ultimately want to see decriminalization? Do you want to see an adult?
So far, and this is of all drugs, which is kind of different
Yeah.
to other countries' approaches, because cannabis so far has been discussed on its own, but the whole issue is kind of like it's a total issue of drug policy and it's failed in all these different ways. So decriminalization is the current consensus that I see, but regulation and legalization is also being talked about. And you can see that the citizens, when they contribute, and you can hear them talking, they're absolutely dying to talk about regulation and what that's going to look like and whether or not they're going to do it. They really want to discuss it and understand what it's all about.
And what about the position use market? What are you ultimately hoping to see in ideal legislation?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're legalization of cannabis is kind of what we want, an adult use model. Um, we're currently thinking about different models. We like the Spanish model in some ways, but there are issues with that. The Canadian model is good. All the different models are great. So we're kind of working on our ideal model based on kind of feedback and stuff like that. But we do want the regulated adult use market because we see the harms of illicit market cannabis every day. It's a big problem here with synthetic cannabis. It's
Yeah,
huge in Ireland. It's
dangerous
absolutely
stuff.
huge.
I mean, yeah, and until you do something about reform, you're just going to see more of that sort of stuff. And we still have
It's
a few of that in New York and things like that. And it's much, much less than it was. But when it was no cannabis laws at all, just there was some really dangerous stuff out there.
Yeah, it's getting really bad here at the moment. It's really kicked off for whatever reason, but we're seeing hospitalizations a lot of the time, a lot of injury. So we would argue regulated model, safe supply. It saves lives. That's the argument that we're trying to make. So we definitely want a regulated model. In terms of decriminalization, home growing of cannabis should be decriminalized. We think that's what we recommend. And drug use in general should be decriminalized. That's my view personally.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, two really good points there. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the stance in the U.S. is a lot of times we'll see advocates pushing for markets that don't include home grow, and I have to remove myself as a journalist from really putting an opinion in the article, but like on a personal stance, it just feels like you're not having a complete legalization unless you have home grow because it's the only way you have fair, accessible control for all consumers.
Definitely, yeah. Strong advocates for home grow. We actually put that into our statement at the Justice Committee last summer about home grow, and it's taken quite seriously actually from government.
Really,
They were quite sympathetic towards it. They saw it as a good alternative to the illicit market, um,
that's
a very
amazing.
strong alternative.
I mean, if you're being pragmatic, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and then, from the other point, talking about decriminalization, I think in America, the one that always gets brought up is Portugal. Portugal's
Yeah, the
decriminalization
Rush Ban,
approach is always
should be decriminalized. That's my view personally.
absolutely, yeah. I mean, two really good points there. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the stance in the U.S. is a lot of times we'll see advocates pushing for markets. Is that what you're angling for, or is there a different approach to decrim in your mind?
Yeah, kind of at the moment in Ireland, a lot of the national coverage and national discussion is about Portugal's model.
Mm,
Especially political parties who are in favour of policy reform are very strong advocates for Portugal, and for good reason. They done quite a bit to help addiction problems. But in terms of the cannabis model, I don't think it's ideal because we're still dealing with an illicit supply. And we're also
right.
dealing, even though it's decriminalised, it's technically, I don't really think it's a full decriminalisation because you can be fined. You can be, fined for having possession of cannabis, which
Right.
I don't think
It's
is decrim, you know?
yeah, it's minimal penalties, but still criminalized.
Yeah, there's still penalties, and if you're caught with cannabis and you're fined a couple of €100, that can really put you out of paying rent or anything, it's not good. Like,
Yeah, and I think it goes back to a point you were kind of touching on earlier is, we really need to separate the fact that cannabis and drugs are, not really the same thing, kind of, the same way we approach other substances out there. It needs to be kind of legalized in its own approach. Does that be a correct
yes.
summation?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think the different drugs, they've got these different effects, these different pharmacological effects, the physical effects, mental effects, social effects. Um, like in terms of regulation, cannabis and other drugs, if we are going to talk about legalizing or regulating other drugs, they should be considered in their own merit. And cannabis especially, it's going to be a completely, if we have some form of heroin assisted treatment, the regulations around that are going to be completely different to the regulations around cannabis because just on the basis of how much harm they do to the individual, and other issues like that. So cannabis, I think, definitely 100% agree with you there. It deserves its own form of legalization. Um, so there needs
Yeah,
to be a
and
separation at some point, you know?
yeah, and and that's the problem. I mean, at least it sounds like at least with you guys, I don't know if your lawmakers will, get the job done, but at least in America, we don't even have that kind of input, it feels like, to really kind of get the public sentiment on like what needs to be done with these sort of things. And we kind of just, I don't know, it feels like they often will, hear the public, we'll push for it, and then it just doesn't kind of happen. So I hope that you guys can, get through and, let the lawmakers know that this is the will of the people, and it actually is the pragmatic approach to getting it done and actually making better public health decisions.
Yeah, I think with trends in Europe with homegrown, it seems to be a staple in a lot of the countries that are starting to loosen laws. And there was, from our discussions with people in government and political people, um, there is favour towards that kind of decriminalise of homegrown model where it's kind of a personal thing that you're allowed to cultivate X amount of plants, blah blah blah. In terms of regulatory models, we actually there's not as much conversation about how that's going to work because there, on the one hand, there's problems with the EU, with the European Union, which we're a part of, and there's also, I don't know if we're going to be the people to take the first steps, but maybe some form of light legalization.
And yeah, that's a really interesting component, with the EU. I want to touch on, what's potentially going on in Germany, but currently, what are the laws like? If you were to hypothetically legalize, would you be able to do inter-nation transit with the other legalized nations, or where?
Laws. And there was, from our discussions with people in government and political people, um, there is favour towards that kind of decriminalise of homegrown model where it's kind of a personal thing that you're allowed to cultivate X amount of plants, blah blah blah. In terms of regulatory models, we actually there's not as much conversation about how that's going to work because there, on the one hand, there's problems with the EU, with the European Union, which we're a part of.
Where does that currently stand with the EU? Because in the US, our states can't ship across state lines, and that's kind of is
Yeah,
a big stumbling block for our market.
yeah, that's a big thing for the American. Yeah, for the American. In terms of the European law, I'm not 100% read up on it, but from my understanding, there's a number of European treaties about drug control and stuff like that, about shipping and you know drugs across different borders and stuff like that, which are still in place. So either they can be ignored, which doesn't seem like they can be ignored, or they need to be reformed. And there is some effort from some European activists to kind of change that, but like the European Union is quite bureaucratic. It's quite slow to get anything done there because it's more of a centralized power. That's kind of distant. Like even in Ireland, even though we're members of the European Union, it's not very often that you engage with those institutions. You're more focused on your national government and stuff like that. But sometimes there are these barriers on kind of meta issues, such as like a legalized thing about different countries. which are very difficult to change. Just as being an Irish citizen, there needs to be there's other ways to do it that I'm not really too sure.
So if Ireland were to legalize and get that adult use market, good chance it would have to work within its borders for the most part to for the product and things of that nature. Would that be correct?
I would, yeah, yeah. I think that's the way it works. Yeah.
And how about what is like the cultivation culture? Is it would it be having to establish those indoor grows and everything like that, or is there any belief that in the this sort of climate that any cannabis can like be a quality cannabis can be grown in Ireland? What's like the grow scene or any sort of like hypothesis on what the grow potential could be over there?
There's a community of growers in Ireland who are kind of on social media and stuff like that, who are quite good growers. We have a lot of people in our community are really into their growing. But I think even the UK is a much stronger scene than us in Ireland. It's a lot more quiet in terms of cultivation culture and stuff like that. But there is a kind of a bubbling culture coming up. But like from the kind of the German model, it seems like they're only allowing like 3 or 4 plants as well for personal use. So I'm not too sure. In Ireland, with in terms of cultivation, there are growers, but a lot of our bud that's recreational is imported from the likes of the UK, the Netherlands, Spain. A lot of our stuff that you'd buy on the streets is imported, which kind of leads to the synthetic problem as well, because we don't have that kind of homegrown kind of market.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the thing I was wondering. Ireland's a beautiful country, but it's got a tough sort of weather condition. It seemed like for quality cannabis cultivation, and a
Yeah,
lot.
that's
So it
it.
seems
That's
like
it.
you'd seem like you'd have to get legalization to go to get the indoor grows established, or if you really wanted to try to get them, on the underground scene, and hopefully you just not get picked up. But it has to be like indoor. Seems like at that point, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It does have to be indoor. Some people use the polytunnels and stuff like that, but most growers grow indoor. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm talking out. That was the thing I was wondering. Ireland's a beautiful country, but it's got a tough sort of weather condition. It seemed like for quality cannabis cultivation, and a
Yeah,
lot.
that's
So it
it.
seems
That's
like
it.
you'd seem like you'd have to get legalization to go to get the indoor grows established, or if you really wanted to try to get them, on the underground scene, and hopefully you just not get picked up. But it has to be like indoor. Seems like at that point, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It does have to be indoor. Some people use the polytunnels and stuff like that, but most growers grow indoor. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm talking out. That was the thing I was wondering. Ireland's a beautiful country, but it's got a tough sort of weather condition. It seemed like for quality cannabis cultivation, and a
Yeah,
lot.
that's
So it
it.
seems
That's
like
it.
you'd seem like you'd have to get legalization to go to get the indoor grows established, or if you really wanted to try to get them, on my ass about cultivation. So I'm just gonna move on from that point. Sorry,
No worries.
I got in that. I'm like, why am I talking cultivation? I'm like the most basic grower. I don't know shit about this part. Sorry about that.
No worries.
No,
No
but
worries.
kind of pivoted back. You touched on Germany. Germany my ass about cultivation, so I'm just gonna move on from that point. Sorry,
No worries.
I got in that. I'm like, why am I talking cultivation? I'm like the most basic grower. I don't know shit about this part. Sorry about that.
No worries.
No,
No
but
worries.
kind of pivoted back. You touched on Germany. Germany my ass about cultivation, so I'm just gonna move on from that point. Sorry,
No worries.
I got in that. I'm like, why am I talking cultivation? I'm like the most basic grower. I don't know shit about this part. Sorry about that.
No worries.
No,
No
but
worries.
kind of pivoted back. You touched on Germany. Germany my ass about cultivation, so I'm just gonna move on from that point. Sorry,
No worries.
I got in that. I'm like, why am I talking cultivation? I'm like the most basic grower. I don't know shit about this part. Sorry about that.
No worries.
No,
No
but
worries.
kind of pivoted back. You touched on Germany. Germany my ass about cultivation, so I'm just gonna move on from that point. Sorry,
No worries.
I got in that. I'm like, why am I talking cultivation? I'm like the most basic grower. I don't know shit about this part. Sorry about that.
No worries.
No,
No
but
worries.
kind of pivoted back. You touched on Germany. Germany my ass about cultivation. Germany came out the gate, I believe it was last year, when they said, they're really looking into, full scale legalization. And then a couple months ago, kind of said they're taking a different revised, possibly considered scaled back approach to it. Can you kind of walk through your reaction to seeing, from, your perspective in Ireland, and, does that impact you guys at all?
I think it's positive impact actually. I think this the stepping back was a bit disheartening in some ways, but kind of Germany went out the gate with kind of a very strong legalized model, a very strong regulated model with stores and with taxes and with controlled strengths and stuff like this, different strengths and different things like that. Um, but because I think of European law, that's why that kind of got scaled back. And because of the European law difficulties and the negotiations with the EU weren't going anywhere. So they had to kind
Mm.
of take maybe a Spanish kind of model. But it is positive for us as activists here because we can point to a country that's very close to us and that we have relationships with and that's in the same union, economic union as us that are beginning this process. And we can say, well, this is something that we should follow. So it is a good thing, it's actually a great thing in a lot of ways.
That's amazing. And, I would love to go back just a little bit too, talking about your experience working with the government. What has it been like from your hands-on experience working with them? And, if you can kind of break down the different sort of support or opposition that are going on through the major political parties.
Okay, yeah, yeah, I can go through that. So within the government, it's a multi-party government of three different parties. So we've kind of got two big parties who are quite similar to each other, and then there's a smaller party named the Green Party. So they're kind of an environmentalist party. So these are the guys who actually got the Citizens Assembly into the government's program. They
Hmm.
initially ran on a legalized cannabis campaign, very strong legalized cannabis campaign in the election in 2020. So when they entered negotiations with the government, with the other parties, the two massive parties, they kind of shot that idea down. They said, "Well, we're not going to go into a government with you if you don't remove the cannabis legalization thing from your program." So they removed it, but they snuck in the Citizens Assembly kind of under the rug,
Well done,
which
well done.
which they got in. So it was disappointing. A lot of people felt kind of betrayed by these people who ran on this legalization campaign. And when they got into government, in the negotiations about the program, it was gone. But they did get the Citizens Assembly in there, which is a silver lining. In terms of even the opposition, so the main opposition party, which is quite popular in Ireland, Sinn Féin, they don't have a stance on cannabis. We've met with a couple of their TDs, which are Irish politicians. Um, I'm discussing with them and kind of behind closed doors. They're a little bit more open to it. They're much more open to it behind closed doors. But for some reason, when push comes to shove and everything's public, they accept it's no comment. We don't know. It's we'll see what
Wow.
happens. So there's actually that's strange. And then most of the other parties are kind of smaller, and most of them are pro decrim, and it's kind of starting to grow. A lot of the little parties are starting to kind of amplify the issue. They're starting to talk about it more in the parliament. They're starting to discuss it more and push more. So,
Pardon?
sorry, yeah. So some smaller parties in opposition are starting to take it on, but we're also seeing within governments now. We had the Green Party who are pro decrim. We've worked with those quite a bit, but the other main kind of political party in Ireland that's in government that's kind of been around forever for 100 years type of thing. They worked quite closely kind of with people leading up to that Justice Committee meeting last summer, and they have come out in favour of legalisation as well. This is a government, a mainstream government party who are coming out in favour of decriminalisation and legalisation as well. But there's one party that's in government with them, which is more of a centre right wing party, a little bit right wing, kind of mostly centre, but quite reactionary, who are absolutely raging. They're raging against legalization. They don't want anything got to do with it. They're shouting it down all the time, which is the most difficult part, in some ways. They're kind of an older party. Their voter base will be more older. They're kind of more old school, kind of
Kind of the
centre right.
classic opposition.
Yeah, they're classic opposition, but they're in government, and yeah, yeah. So, but even within government, there's a conflict between government parties who are kind of some are legalization pro, and the others aren't. So it's this weird clash, um, across the whole political spectrum. It's not really like one side yes, one side no. Like there's infighting within different parties about whether it's a good idea or not. So it's all over the place, but there is more support than ever. There's a lot of support for it now, and there was a motion in the Parliament that was passed on decriminalisation. It was voted. It was just a motion. It wasn't a bill or a law. It was just we support decriminalisation, which the government passed. So there is
Amazing.
there is consensus.
Progress.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
consensus.
So we're starting to get there. I mean, that's awesome to hear. Glad to hear that the government's picking up on it, and even more so, it's glad to hear that you guys have multiple parties and there's fighting in there because that I think is the hugest problem in America is that we have not to go too deep on us, but the two-party system really just kind of nips it all in the bud because I feel like there are a lot of the older guard on both sides of the aisle that have been the
Oh
opposition
yeah.
to it, and with us we have the Democrats that seem open to it, but a lot of folks that talk to them, it's really trying to pull a horse up a hill. It's really tough to try to get them to do anything. And, then the Republicans, any sort of infighting in either party is really minimized, but the Republicans really are locked in on a lot of that stuff. And there's maybe only a few minority voices, minority just being a minority power voices, that are standing up to it. And it really seems to make it a lot more difficult to make any progress on the federal level over here.
Oh, the federal level seems to be a big problem in the States. I see a lot of that on kind of when I'm checking the news and stuff like that. Seems like an uphill battle, It seems it's a giant thing you're against that's very, very difficult at the grassroots level to battle.
Yeah, it really is, and that's one of the big things for us is the state level has kind of been the pivot to where you're starting to see in the local take it in. Where even there was a banking law that our businesses aren't allowed to take taxes in. So the federal, we've tried for years to get it done, and now there's several states that are just saying at least we'll do it on a state level. Um,
Yeah,
and with Ireland, with you guys, it has to be on the national level, right? You can't do any sort of like more local sort of cannabis reform. Is that correct?
no, no, yeah, it'd be completely nationalized. There wouldn't be any kind of splinter regions. The government here is quite centralized. It covers the whole country. So yeah, the law of the land will be the law of the land. So if we do get that policy, we won't have to deal with that problem. Maybe some issues with Northern Ireland, which is a completely separate state.
Right.
That's an issue that might come up in terms of the border because we don't have a border.
Right.
It's an open border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. So I suppose you have that problem in America as well, with different states, different. So
Some little
yeah,
overlap or similarity there.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I appreciate you walking through that because that's what I think the whole purpose of this. We're gonna the first chunk of the shows I'm doing. I was talking to you, and then I'm talking to an advocate in Mexico, and we're trying to get the
oh, very
perspective of
nice.
some of these different countries, and really just love seeing the comparison to it. The pros and cons to it. So really, I would love to bring it home in the last final couple of questions before turning it to you. Is kind of get your hypothesis. Where do you see Ireland going in the next few years? Do you have a timeline, or is it kind of wide open for you at this point?
Um, well, yeah, okay, that's a good. That's an interesting question because I think about this myself. I think this citizens assembly that's happening now. This is kind of it's a big step, because on other issues, there's only been a couple of them, and with other issues, it's been on quite progressive issues like the same-sex marriage, abortion, climate change, stuff like this, and now drugs. Okay, and it's only started kind of 2 months ago. And that assembly is given strong consensus for at least decriminalisation, and they're yet to discuss legalisation, which I believe will be positive. So that wraps up in October, and once that wraps up, it's then the government's opportunity to act. So I'm hoping that at least by 2024 next year, some stage next year, we will at least have some form of decriminalisation and a legalised model in the works. So that's my hypothesis on where it's going to go. It's also very possible that we don't get legalization and that we just get a decriminalization model kind of similar to Portugal, which is still progress, but in terms of the cannabis fight and safe supply of cannabis, that would be a bit of a loss. It might actually make the situation in some ways a little bit more sketchy because the supply will still be unsafe. But my hope, and I think it's probable, I'm optimistic that we will see a decriminalisation Portugal style for kind of addiction. And then in terms of regulation, I hope we take some cues from North America, Canada, and the rest of Europe, and we start to build up a brand new system for Ireland. It's good for the economy, it's good for health, it's good for marginalised communities to stop being targeted by these laws, which is what's happening. So that's my hope, and I think the Citizens Assembly, 99 random people who are having this conversation, who are discussing these issues, I think the common sense, once you see the evidence, once you hear the arguments, the common consensus is that it needs to change. So I think that's what we are going to see change. I think very soon. I'd say keep your eye on the Citizens Assembly.
Fingers crossed, man. Here's hoping we can start saying in America, not the Portugal model, but the Irish model on a couple of different
The Irish
approaches.
model, yeah, yeah, yeah. The Irish model. That's what we need. Yeah, an Irish
Uh,
model. Yeah.
I would love it, man. I would love it. Yeah, Ryan, I really appreciate you taking walk us through this. This is obviously a very deep and intricate process, and I would love to circle back once the report is released this fall. So keep in touch. Anything I can do to help get the word out, let me know for sure. One thing I always love to do before we wrap these interviews up is turn it over to you. Was there anything else that you thought the viewers need to know about that we haven't touched on yet, or is there anything that if they're watching this that you want them to come away with?
Yeah, that's good question actually, because I was thinking if anyone is from
To walk us through this. This is obviously a very deep and intricate process, and I would love to circle back once the report is released this fall. So keep in touch. Anything I can do to help get the word out, let me know for sure. One thing I always love to do before we wrap these interviews up is turn it over to you. Was there anything else that you thought the viewers need to know about that we haven't touched on yet, or is there anything that if they're watching this that you want them to come away with?
Yeah, that's good question actually, because I was thinking if anyone is from
To walk us through this. This is obviously a very deep and intricate process, and I would love to circle back once the report is released this fall. So keep in touch. Anything I can do to help get the word out, let me know for sure. One thing I always love to do before we wrap these interviews up is turn it over to you. Was there anything else that you thought the viewers need to know about that we haven't touched on yet, or is there anything that if they're watching this that you want them to come?
Ireland that's watching this, the Citizens Assembly is currently looking for public input. They have a portion on their website that's open until the 30th of June. So I'm not sure if this podcast will be out by then, but they have a public consultation open for residents in Ireland. They're looking for your views on what way to take this, and I'd recommend writing in and advocating strongly for legalization, because they're going to be looking, those 99 citizens are going to be reading through that in the next few weeks. So that's what I'd recommend. And if you're from a different country and stuff like that, follow us, on Twitter, keep up to date and support us. The support really helps on legalization. Your experiences from legal countries or with strategies that work really helps us. We like to keep in touch with different efforts that are going on, but sometimes you can kind of get siloed into your own country. So more collaboration, and more, if anyone has an experience on cannabis legalization, how it went for them, do let me know. I'm very interested to hear how it is in your country. So hopefully we can use as evidence for lawmakers in Ireland. Very interested to hear all that type of stuff,
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan McHale, Executive Committee member for Crainn and student for Sensible Drug Policy member. Really appreciate you taking the time. Yeah, we will now make a programming note to make sure this gets put out before the 30th. I was deciding which the order the episodes are. So yeah, we'll definitely put this out early to try and get the word out for you guys. And yeah, man, pulling for you. Hopefully you get decrim, and hopefully a whole lot more in legalizations coming for you soon.
Yes, thanks.
Now make a program.